So let's see, what's actually changed with the build in Crucible? Well, for starters, we're using a staff, and because we no longer have access to Eternal Damnation, we've totally ditched the Transcendence thing. This is a loss of survivability. The good news is you're still tanky, you're just not like run into Exarch balls tanky. I mean, you can still tank 1 or 2, but it's not like literally eating them to heal. But like I said, you're still tanky, and there is some advanced tech that we might be able to do to make this like god tier again. But for now, you know, we're pretty limited with what we can do. The good news is, because we no longer need an amulet and a chest, we have more flexibility to do some cool things with things like coil. So, Lightning Coil with Taste of Hate, the Fizz Azali helmet, and the Watcher's Eye. So this is all going to be familiar to you if you played last league. But that is actually enough to get 100% Fizz conversion. I'm just trying to find my Watcher's Eye here. Yeah. So with all that kind of stuff, you end up with 100% Fizz conversion, which means this build can actually still tank Uber Shaper Slams, any Fizz hit in the game basically, and take almost no damage. So that's good, right? So you still got the Fizz mitigation, arguably more just because you actually are getting 100% with basic gear. So that's the good news. This also means you no longer need armor. So you can totally drop armor. Keeping in mind, last week, the only reason we ran it was for 2 things, Transcendence and Molten Shell. Now, remember, Molten Shell got nerfed this patch, so it's no longer the king of survivability. It's still really good, but it doesn't feel as bad to drop it because, you know, it's like way nerfed, right? So instead of using Molten Shell, we're using Steel Skin, which is, it's okay. But I have some tech where I might use a small cluster with Enduring Composure and then run Immortal Core, because I do think that will be better. But for now, we're just running Steel Skin, no drama. Now that solves your Fizz. Chaos mitigation is just Chaos Treads, same as always. On this game, if you have capped Chaos Treads, you're basically immortal to Chaos damage, so that's easy. And so the only thing you're really trying to solve here is elemental damage. Now, as I said, no Transcendence means you're no longer immortal to elemental damage, but because we have more Flask effect thanks to reworked Pathfinder, we actually get about 40% elemental mitigation. I'm just realizing some of my flasks aren't quality. But anyway, we have so much elemental mitigation thanks to the reworked Pathfinder with Nature's Boon and all that kind of stuff. And we're even taking things like Natural Remedies, we're pathing down here now instead of going over here. This gives us enough flask effect that this is something like 40% elemental mitigation. And then on top of that, we still have Enfeeble, obviously, and, you know, 5k life, cap suppression, you know, all that good stuff, right? All that good stuff. There is one layer of defense that I'd like to talk about real quick with Progenesis. If you drop the Quartz Flask, you get phasing on kill and cap suppression on your tree, and then you drop the Quartz Flask for a Progenesis. This gives you another 40% damage reduction, or whatever you want to call it. You know, if you look up the flask, it makes you take delayed damage. But point is, with that setup, it's insane, right? You're still giga tanky then. Now here's the cool thing. Because we are a softcore Andy this league, a lot of people mentioned last league, why do you still bother to cap resistances on your gear when you're capping resistances through flasks anyway? Well, in my opinion, and I'll show you actually what this looks like, right? So if I enter a map, my flasks aren't on. So I have like 0 res, right? For about, what, 1.5 seconds? But because we're softcore this league, we're just embracing softcore, and I'm actually not kept res without my flasks, as you can see. But when my flasks proc, boom. Now what's really cool about that is by relying on that softcore, you know, defense level, I actually managed to cap my resist through my purity and my flasks, and I don't need any res on my gear. The only res I need is Chaos Res, which, remember, if we get a Progenesis, we'll cap my Chaos Res too. So the only actual resistance I end up needing is Lightning Res because of Coil. Which, if you remember, I mentioned Cloak of Flames earlier, you might not even need a Coil, because remember, the Armor and Evasion doesn't really do much. The Life Mod's actually a bad thing, because it means we lose access to the Life Mastery on the chest. So we might actually end up replacing a Coil for Cloak of Flames, and then we literally don't need any res on the gear at all. So that's amazing. So you can see, like, a lot of my gear, just I don't even bother with anything other than Chaos Res, really. So my res is really minimal. Now, because we get that 100% Fizz conversion with the Coil, we no longer need Dawnbreaker. Because we no longer need Dawnbreaker, it's, you know, come to my attention, thanks to Twitch chatter Void. He actually has made a video for this, but he recommends a staff, and I think he's 100% on the money here. A staff in Crucible League specifically is absolutely insane for this build. It's more than double damage, especially when you factor in Crucible. A staff like this, for example, with Chaos Dot Multi, Skill Effect Duration, Dot Multi, Chaos Dot Multi, plus gems, Chaos Damage, and in the 6th link with gem levels and everything. Because remember, Impending Doom scales really well with gem levels, but it's really hard to get gem levels because it's not a skill, right? You can't scale it with an amulet with plus skill levels because it's not a skill, right? It's a support gem. But the +2 support gem mod on the staff actually does work for this. And so with all that staff tech, you end up with more than double the damage. So this version of the build in softcore ends up with like 40 million DPS. The dot cap is 35, but you know, you still get that damage value on things like Ubers. So I already on this character have more damage than I did on my build last league, which is crazy to me. Obviously softcore, so you know, yeah. Keeping in mind, I am still very tanky though. I have all the same defense except for the elemental mitigation, which again, I still have a lot of with the enfeeble, the flasks, and the suppression and all that stuff, so. What else has changed? Well, the biggest thing that's changed, I would say, is I'm no longer pathing left side. I mentioned that briefly earlier. That's because we want more flask nodes. The reason we want more flask nodes is I'm more reliant on my flasks in this setup of the build. And so it's kind of important that I have uptime on the quartz and the quicksilver. They're still not quite 100%, but they're very, very, very close. And I think I could get to 100% with a slightly better belt. So that's good. So a lot of people have been mentioning an issue with Impending Doom with having to need to double cast like that, where it doesn't detonate. Through a lot of testing and science, we've made a short list, which I'll show on the screen right now. And it seems to be one of these things, right? Or maybe a combination of these things. So the Impending Doom, the gems aren't high enough level because they gain AoE when they level up, and it means they don't overlap, which means they don't detonate. You need Skittering Runes Anointed, so this gives you a ton of AoE. Remember, you need to make them overlap so that they like remove each other, which detonates the Impending Doom. Your cast speed is too low or too high. It's more of an issue if it's too low. Too high, I think too high just means you lose damage. Too low can actually brick it, which I showed, which is why I took off my haste aura. Your curse limit is wrong. This is a simple mistake a lot of occultists make because they take the +1 curse node on the tree thinking it helps them, but it actually hurts you. Gems are in the wrong order in gloves, so remember you need the punishment in the first link. And then now this is another thing, missing quality or Impending Doom or Spell Cascade, because that means you lose AoE, right? You can see the quality there is AoE on that, on those things. If I just swap in my high level gems again, you'll see it starts to detonate again. So it does seem to be something to do with one of those things. Just if Impending Doom isn't working, it's just one of those things. And that's fine. If I make this as a second character, can you level with vixens? Yeah, if you are starting this build, this league, like maybe you want to make a new character, just be aware that your mana is a huge problem on this build. This is why I particularly like the Pathfinder version, because if you have access to this reduced mana cost of skills mod, combined with the Anoint, keeping in mind you can path towards Skittering Runes if you need to on a budget. This is what I did when I league started. I just passed all the way over here and just took the nodes on the tree. That solves your mana, but before you get this craft, right, the mana cost mods on your jewelry and the Anoint, your mana is a huge problem with vixens. But luckily, now remember this won't work in reds very well, but if you're just league starting, you're just leveling the build, maybe you don't have vixens, you can still play this build without vixens. All you need is the Curse Crown support gem. This is what I did, and it was actually totally fine. It was totally fine until about, I want to say red maps. That's when it fell off. So I'll just show you like a red map with this setup. But I think I had about 500k DPS, and it was okay. It got me my watchstones, got me to level 90. You know, got me to level 90. So it did the trick. But you see, it still works without the vixens. But it's not like amazing. You definitely do want the vixens. Now the good news is you don't have mana problems nearly as bad with the Cursed Ground setup. So you don't need the reduced mana cost mod on your flask when you do this. You can actually just play this pretty naturally with either a mana flask or just EB. As you can see, this is the damage without a vixens. Keeping in mind my gear at this point is really good. When I league started this build, it was closer to 500k DPS, which was not great. But it got me through to level 90, got me my watchstone, so it was good enough to start. So if we're talking about gear, so I mentioned already the lightning coil, the helmet, and the taste of hate with the Watcher's Eye. That's for the 100% fizz conversion to elemental damage. This means you no longer take physical damage, like in terms of hits. You still take dots, but you know that's fine. You have a lot of regen. It's not too bad. Helmet wise, this you want to get it on a fractured base and use Veiled Chaos. The trick here, right? Some people have been asking already in chat SF, how did I get my helmet? Well, this is really cool. We're once again exploiting metacrafting. So if you do, suffixes cannot be changed, and you unveil the focus mod with the fractured res. If you have an open suffix, you can actually craft that suffixes cannot be changed mod and reforge either fire, cold, or lightning. Because if you look at the helmet, there's only one fire mod, one cold mod, and one lightning mod. And so it's guaranteed to add a resistance mod. So that's what I did. So this helmet cost me, I got it first try, I got pretty lucky, but it only cost me like maybe 2 to 3 divines to craft. So it was a bargain. And then for the life, you just do suffixes cannot be changed, reforged life, or you can do Eldritch Currency. You can just spam Eldritch Currency, that works too. Just remember, you need Searing Exarch dominant if you're gonna use Eldritch Currency, so you don't, you know, wipe your suffixes. Boots are exactly the same method. You know, I got Fractured Spell Suppression boots. These are the ones I'm wearing now, but I have a pair crafting. So it's the exact same method, right? I get Spell Suppression, I Essence Chaos Res until I get a good suffix. You can reforge the suffix on if you need to. Suffix is going to be changed, Veiled Chaos, unveil the movement speed, make sure you block mana. I am trying to get movement speed Onslaught, which has been very expensive and I haven't hit it yet. But eventually I'll hit it, Copium, and then I'll have my boots just craft on life and you're good to go. Belt, highly recommend a Fractured Flask Charge mod, highly recommend it. Optimally it would be Flask Effect, because Flask Effect is insane on this build. But, you know, I don't have one yet. And but this gets the job done. Like, this build is perfectly reasonable. I got a Flask Effect mod, duration mod, which is perfect, and then crafted cooldown with life. I just crafted this with essences, but you could honestly probably just spam Chaos. The only reason I didn't spam Chaos is because this league, Chaos has been, currency in general has been very scarce. I feel poorer at this league in softcore trade, well, in chat SF, than I did last league in SSF with Ziz in Sanctum. So currency this league has been very hard to get. So yeah, I kind of settled pretty hard, but it gets the job done. It is what it is. Now, I'm still in the process of crafting my jewelry, but remember how I said, so this is the really cool thing about softcore once again, I don't need res on my gear because I get res from my flasks. So I'm actually going to end up crafting some insane chaos damage rings. I'll show you real quick because it sounds more complicated than it is, right? So if I whip out a ring, bada bing, bada boom, get my Iolite. You don't have to use an Iolite, you could use an Amethyst or a Vermilion. We're just doing an Iolite because we're in softcore once again, right? So yeah, you would just spam essences. Now it is one of the special essences, which is the bad news. So this is going to be quite expensive, but you know, obviously I want to get as good of a character as possible. So you could either do something like this, where you just spam repeatedly until you get cast speed or chaos res, or you could annul it down until the delirium mod is the only suffix, right? And then do suffixes can't be changed, and then either reforge caster or reforge chaos. And then again, you would need to annul it down. Suffixes going to be changed, reforge chaos. So I'm not sure what's going to be the cheapest way to craft this ring. It's going to be a long-term project. And then again, suffixes going to be changed, veiled chaos. So, very expensive, but very effective. And then you would just craft on the mana cost mod. There we go. It's such a money sink with multi-rings. Yeah, it's a very expensive ring. At that point, just fracture it. That's a very good point from Twitch chat, actually. If this looks way too expensive to you, it is probably like, what, 3 times cheaper to get a fractured base. I don't know if I'll be able to buy a fractured Iolite ring. I probably won't. But I imagine in the Crucible League, you can buy a Fractured Dot Multi base, or Fractured Cast Speed, or Chaos Res base for like 20C, 30C. So that would cut the cost substantially. But I'm probably gonna go for the ILI ring because, you know, min-max. So I already talked about which mods you want to look for, this one in particular. But when you're crafting the staff, now my staff is just a freak accident, I got lucky. But the key thing to note is that on a war staff specifically, there's not that many chaos modifiers. So we're once again going to abuse tags. So you can see below 83, you can't even hit this mod, but it doesn't matter if it's 83, that's fine. If you do Harvest Reforged Chaos, you can only hit this with the 300 weighting, this with the 2000 weighting. Keeping in mind, +2 is not even a bad mod to get. Like if you hit this, that's totally fine. And then Chaos Res with 750, and then the one that you want with 1050. Now, my recommendation is to spam till you get tier 1, and then multi-mod, right? So you might need to annul, and then you just multi-mod +2 support gems and chaos damage, and that's fine. That's the stuff in the POB. It's this bad boy right here, right? So that's simple. That's fine. That's fine. That's totally fine. Now, if you don't want to craft at all, like let's say you're like, you know what? Screw crafting. I hate crafting. Crafting disgusts me. You can just use a Cane of the Coolermac. This is actually your best in slot. This is your actual best in slot. Like it beats any rare, but remember it's easier to craft Crucible trees on a rare. So a rare staff is very competitive. My staff has, I believe, either the same or more DPS than a cane. But once you get a Crucible tree on a cane, it obviously gets better than the rare staff again. It's just hard to do that. So on the cane specifically, you want Chaos Dot Multi, Chaos Damage, and plus support gems. 2 out of 3 is good. If you were gonna pick 2 out of 3, you'd probably want Chaos Damage and +3 support gems. The Dot Multi is probably the weakest mod here. Plus, because the Impending Doom scales really well with levels. Now, if you want to craft a staff, if you want to know what the perfect staff looks like, you would most likely want to get a Fractured staff base with Dot Multi on a Maelstrom base because it's got the most block, right? So you get Fractured damage over time multiplier. You harvest Reforged Chaos till you get the Chaos Dot Multi roll. Then, this is where it gets complicated and very expensive. You do cannot roll attack mods, Exalt, suffixes can be changed, Scour, and you keep doing that over and over and over and over and over until you get +1 gems. And if you get mana with +1 gems, you have to do suffixes cannot be changed, annul. And if you get +1 or 2 to lightning, cold, fire, etc., you also have to annul that. This process costs about 60 divines. It's extremely expensive, but it will allow you to multi-mod the god staff. One more note, I get a lot of questions about Pathfinder versus Occultist. Now, it's my opinion that Occultist is nice for the pops and it is totally fine early game. So I'd say roughly, if you're planning to get to maybe 92, 93, around that range, like that's usually where you tap out the league. You know, maybe you do some bosses, but you're not trying to push a giga endgame thing. Occultist is fine. You know, pops are great. It's a good build, very solid. But if you're trying to min-max the build as far as possible, I don't see a reason why you would ever play Occultist over Pathfinder in that situation. Occultist, so Pathfinder gives you more res. It gives you better, faster wither. It gives you more damage. Gives you the permaflask uptime for less damage taken. Has better time dealing with mana. Better time dealing with it just does everything that Occultist does, but better, except for the ASMR pops and the minus regen mod. That's all you're really losing. The reason I call them ASMR pops is because you still have insane clear with Pathfinder. And it doesn't have the same feel because it doesn't have that pop, but it is very good. I honestly, if Master Toxicist, the Prolif, if it made a pop noise, I honestly, I don't think you would ever play a Cultist over Pathfinder, but I'm willing to admit the pops are insanely satisfying, and if that's what you want to do, go for it. Crouching Shuna has a guide on YouTube for the Occultist version of this build, so you can go check that out. Now, as far as Crucible goes, I did mention earlier, my staff, the most important mod by far is Cooldown Recovery. Cooldown Recovery is effectively a more multiplier. If you're familiar with the build from last league, you'll remember there was a spreadsheet. Now, I'm not sure where you find cooldown exactly, but luckily the mod is really, really rare, so you can just do a little bit of math. My staff has 25, my belt has 12, and that's all. So 37. I have 37 cooldown at the moment. With 37 cooldown, you can see I need between 128 and 150 cast speed. Now, what's tricky is what value are you trying to look at? Now you can look at this in-game or in PUB. I'll show you both. So it's the curse in your Impending Doom setup, which in this case is Despair, right? And it's this number here. So you can see I have 114%. So I actually need a little bit more cast speed. I actually need a little bit more. In PUB, it's just under calculations. You go to, again, that same curse, and you can see it here. In this PUB, it's 122. So I will actually need a little tiny bit more. But cooldown essentially ends up just being a more multiplier to your damage. So this is by far the most important mod to get. Everything else is cherry on the cake, right? I've got chaos damage over time multiplier, but there's also things like plus int gems, there's plus spell gems, there's chaos damage, there's damage over time, there's more cast speed, there's a bunch of useful stuff, but this is definitely the one you want and or need. You really want this mod. This essentially replaces the Balance of Terror that we had from last league. Oh yeah, people ask me as well about Cruelty versus Deadly Ailments. I do think Deadly Ailments is better. The only problem with Deadly Ailments is it ruins your leech from Divergent Void Manipulation. So I'm not sure which one I'm gonna go with. I think I will ultimately ditch the Cruelty support for Deadly because it's so much more damage on Ubers specifically. But for now I'm running Cruelty. Cruelty is totally fine until Ubers. The moment you do Ubers, it's not gonna have enough buff, so that's gonna be a huge problem. So either you could use Cruelty, Awaken Added Chaos, or Deadly as your last support. I would say maybe Awakened Added Chaos if you have Divergent Void Manipulation. Otherwise, Deadly Ailments is probably better. To check your DPS in PUB, just make sure you tick Withered, tick any relevant things depending on stats you've got. 15 stacks of Wither, focus Helm if you have it. Alchemist Genius. Use Vixens Entrapment. This is a new feature by Local Identity. They've updated Path of Building to account now for Vixens. And then you set it to 2 overlaps. I think it is possible to get 3 with Awakened Spell Cascade, but it's finicky and we don't need to deal with that. We don't need to deal with that. So there you go. So anyway, I'm gonna let Toad edit that. Have fun with that, Toad. And yeah, hope your Impending Doom builds are going good if you started with it. Otherwise, if they're not going good, there's actually a ton of builds you can play this league. There's a whole bunch of Crucible builds that are being made as I speak. I think Ziz just died on his cool new artillery ballista build while I was recording this video. So I'm gonna go watch the rip clip. But anyway, have fun with Crucible. Obviously, I know the league mechanic is brutal and unrewarding, but even having said that, it's still fun. Anyway, peace. Yo, where's that rip clip, by the way? Give me that rip clip. Where's the rip clip? Wait, he didn't actually die. Oh, you guys debated me. He didn't even die. Why do you sound mad? True. Why do I sound mad? True. It's a good question.